This isn't 100% perfect, just like the Figma, but it's pretty close and it's close enough to move on. It's close enough to move on and kind of start doing some of these other fun things that we can do with HTML and CSS. Like I said, we're probably not going to get to like everything, but I do want to show off kind of like this background image, maybe building some cards, and importantly, a layout that we can use inside of CSS that's called Flexbox. So Flexbox is going to allow you to do a lot of really cool things when it comes to like layouts and automatically adjusting based on screen sizes and all that type of stuff. So that's what we're going to focus on in this next section. As we go into this, another thing that we also probably want to pull off is targeting the difference between this div and what is ultimately going to be this next div that is probably going to have a div and a div and a div. When we talk about HTML, oftentimes we're managing boxes within boxes, right? Divisions within divisions. And you can use different types of tags for different types of things. You know, HTML has a couple of built-in like larger tags. It might make sense to create a division that we call a section. And we might go back to this one, and instead of just using a div, maybe we use named sections, because named sections are a lot easier for us to target when it comes to CSS. Because one of the issues that I will have is if I'm like, okay, cool, I want to create a div, and then I'm going to put my next section's paragraph inside of this div. Watch what happens as soon as I save it. The text got moved to the center, and it got that red background. And that's because the way CSS works is I specify div, which means it's going to target every single div that I ever put into my HTML. And that's way too broad. Definitely don't want it to do that. It would make a lot more sense maybe to say, let's call this a section, which is a valid HTML tag. And sections are generally reserved for larger pieces of your website. And if I save this, I now lose all my styling over here, except that image is still round. Does that mean, oh no, if I put another image on the page, if I come down here and I put this image on the page, oh, it's also going to be round. I don't want that. I'm being way too broad in my styling for the things that I'm targeting. So I need to be a little bit more specific when it comes to my CSS. We'll make this a section. And if we go over here and we just change this to section, I haven't really solved any problems, because chances are I also want to use section here. And then inside of this section, I'm going to have div times 3. And those 3 divs are going to be my cards. Well, that section is going to get the exact same rules applied as the one above. So if I am just like, I get that same type of stuff. I don't like that. So something cool that you can do with CSS is we can add what's called a class attribute in HTML. And our class attribute allows us to like name sections and target them by name. So we could call this the let's call this the about section. And then this section, that's his manga section, I guess. It looks like manga there. Early career. Oh, that's what it is. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what that is. Early career. So let's do that. Let's come in here. Let's say class, and let's say early career. Yeah, I'm not super fast typing. I'm actually kind of a slow typer, but I do know how to use my little helper. And so as soon as it pops up, I press tab and it automatically jumps your cursor to where it needs to go. I will also say that is like a pro tip of, seasoned software developers. If students will do this all the time. They'll be at class and then they'll do equals and they have to like type everything out. And I've even seen it where it's like, you automatically put those in for me, so I'm going to erase them and put them back in, right? Don't do that. Class tab, you're already there. A mistake I often do make is I'll write class, tab, and then I'll drop in 2 quotes. And that'll automatically put in 2 extra quotes. Whoops, my bad. And then here I do want to point out that I'm doing early dash career, no spaces. And the reason why is because a space, this would now be the early class and the career class. Whereas if I use the hyphen, that's one word now, and I can target it as one word. Does that make sense? You'll also see in CSS maybe an underscore. What's not very common in CSS is to do something like this, but that is incredibly common in JavaScript land. Things to learn as we go through. So let's come back into my CSS and let's say I want to use the about. Now, Notice how this is kind of this gold color and this just turned white when I wrote about. Immediately that color difference should tell me something's probably wrong. I don't know what it is, but it's probably wrong. And if I save it, all my styling goes away. Okay. So what gives? I use the about word. Well, in CSS, you can target tag names directly by just writing the tag name out. Like here I have body, here I have body. Okay. So that's the tag name that you can target. If you want to target the class name in CSS land, you have to lead with the dot. So that single period, that dot, tells CSS, oh, you're targeting a class name. So I know that I'll do that for that class. So then I can save. Now, I also still have that problem, and that is every single image on the page is now going to be rounded. It's going to have a white border, and they're only ever going to be 250 pixels by 250 pixels. And I don't like that. So just to illustrate this, let's take our image, bring it down here. We'll put it inside of this card, even though that doesn't actually look like a card yet. It will when we're done with it. But notice it's still round. I don't like that. Gross. No. So now you're like, oh man, does that mean that I have to go put a class on this guy as well? Sure, that's one way of doing it. Another thing that you can do is, and some people love this and some people hate this, is I can take my definition and I can move it inside of my about section, and it will apply to the one and not apply to the other. So this is what is using a descendant selector. This is one syntax of doing it. If I leave off that little semicolon though, everything's broken. Everything's going to be broken about that. Put it in there, it works. The other way of doing a descendant selector is to do something like dot about space img. That's going to say, okay, go to the about section and look for an image that's inside of it. So this space right here is very important. So descendant selectors are super duper cool. I don't have to go put a class on every single HTML element just because I want it to look a little different. So that's a really nice, quick way of handling those things. There's the nesting selector, and then there's the chained name selector. So this would be, chaining the names together. And this obviously is nesting. Works really well. That's actually a newer feature of CSS. We didn't used to have it. Okay, which is probably why VS Code is like, I don't know why that image doesn't look like it is. If I use a dot, I think it would probably work more. No, it doesn't. That's weird. I'm not going to fight it right now. So I'm just going to drop that in there though. Okay. So that's my about section. I like it. Looks really good. A couple more things I could potentially do is I could say font weight and make it like 700. That's going to bold everything up. It's pretty nice. I could have also just written the word bold, and that would work as well. Okay. I could go up to like 900 font weight. Can't really tell the difference, but there is a slight difference there. But it caps out at 900 for the font weight. So let's just go ahead and use bold. I like that. And then let's go ahead and look at our early career section. Sound good? So we came over here. Oh, and by the way, again, little drop down arrow. I will do this quite often as I'm coding because I'm like, that section's done. I don't want to look at it anymore. All that code's still there. Notice we go from line 5 to line 18. It was just like a good visual for me to be like, okay, I'm now moving on to the next thing. Okay. I could also close that body. Not saving a ton of space there, but I could. Let's do early career. Now, matching names right here and matching names over here, crazy important. They have to be like word for word, letter for letter, symbol for symbol. If I did early capital C and I don't use a capital C over here, and let's do something like, I don't know, padding 100 pixels and save it, doesn't apply. But if I drop in a capital C, it now applies. So things to be very aware of. My general rule of thumb is I don't use uppercase letters if I'm in CSS and HTML. Just never use them. So then I just know, okay, it would never be the capital letter is the issue because I've never used the capital letter. Okay. But if you're intermixing stuff, and especially when you're like bouncing between CSS, JavaScript, HTML, and in JavaScript, you use capital letters all the time. It's like, oh man, maybe that is the capital letter. So, cool. So padding 100 pixels. Cool. That gives us this like space. Okay. Still really big. Like area here. I think 100 pixels on my padding might be a bit much. So maybe we only do something like 10. That image is way big. I don't really want that image. But before I get too crazy into the weeds about, what image I'm going to put here, let's jump back into our HTML and let's put a single card on the page, and let's not worry about the other two cards yet. And if we look at our example, what I would like to look at is here, I have an image and I have some text. So inside of this division, which I might just call a card, because it might be a really easy way for me to target all of my cards together, is I'm going to put in an image, and then I'm going to put in a p tag, and I'm going to type the word lorem, and lorem is just going to give me a garbage paragraph. It's just placeholder content. And what's really nice about that is I don't have to specifically come here and know exactly what I'm going to type. I just know I'm going to have roughly a paragraph of content, and I can just garbage text that for right now. When it becomes more important, somebody else can come in and update the text. I don't care about that piece. Okay. It's just kind of a nice quick way of dumping in a lot of content very quickly. And we come over here, we now have image and we have paragraph, and it looks terrible. But remember, it's going to look terrible until you start applying styles. Let's also go back to, which one is it? This one? Yeah. Let's grab the right picture here. Let's copy this image link, and let's replace the picture there with this picture here. So now we get that little magazine cover and this little paragraph here. And if we're looking at our example, these things are side by side. And so if I want them to be side by side, there's some things I can adjust with their layout. And in order to pull this off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this card division that's holding the image and the paragraph together. And if I come over into here and I do something like dot card, something I can do is I can change the display type of my card to be flex. And what flex is going to do is it's going to say, yeah, cool. Content's only going to take up the amount of space that the content has to take up, and then other stuff can go to the side. So when you make the layout flexible, everything's going to try to go horizontal instead of vertical. Easiest way to think about Flexbox right now. Okay, so quick, easy, great. I like that. Now, if I'm looking here, this image, 142 pixels by 207, 142 by 207, 142 by 207. So, okay, you know what? That's perfectly fine. I can do that, right? Maybe inside of my card, I want to target my image. Whoops. And my image is going to have a height of 142. And my width was what? 207. Nice. So I can dump that in there. That looks really, really small on a website though, right? So why does it look good here and it doesn't look good on my actual website? Oftentimes, styling in these things can be a little misleading. Yeah, I think we're probably right? Those are taller than they are wide. So maybe we could flip these two things. 207 by 140, what? 142. Still super duper small. And if I'm on a really big screen, still a pretty small image. So it might be nice if my image is a little bit more relative to the screen size as opposed to always just being a fixed dimension like this. Instead of using pixels, you can use relative values. A relative value is something like EM, which is basically going to scale off the size of the font. So if I adjust the font, it's going to be relative. This is 207 times the font size. And this is 142 times the font size, which is massive, right? It's probably not what I want. But if we did 2 here, okay, well, guys, that's 2 times the height of that font. So relatively, that doesn't seem very good either. Does that kind of make sense? So you can use EMs, which are relative to the font size. You can also use something like 20%, which is going to be 20% of the width of the page. So as I scale this up, the image scales up with it, which is actually, that's pretty nice. That's pretty close to what I probably want is to be thinking about the width of the window, and let's adjust the size of everything based upon that. So that's one way of handling things. I will say with percentages and screen sizes, sometimes you can get a little bit wonky. And so sometimes you just have to kind of play around with the values and be like, is 20 good? I don't know, maybe 20 is good. Maybe it needs to be like 17.5. And so that's the type of stuff, like, none of that's committed to memory. Every time I go to build something brand new, guys, I'm just pulling those values out of nowhere and checking to see what looks good. Sometimes the answer to that is yes. Okay, 18. Yeah, maybe I like that a little bit better. Something that I don't necessarily love is the fact that that font is going all the way across the sizes of the entire screen. I want to figure out how to make a card, give myself some white space around it, and make sure that the text never goes outside of that card. So what I need to think about now is, okay, maybe I want to take the card and I want the max width of the card. So let's set the width of the card to something like, I don't know, 40% and hit save. Well, what gives? My card is now 40% of the width of the page. My image is 20% of that 40% because percents are going to be relative to whatever their closest container is. Does that kind of make sense? So now I'm like, oh man, oh, I said 20. I forgot I changed this to 18. Sorry, it's 18% of that. So you're like, oh, maybe I want it to be 50%, which might be too much, right? And so again, you might have to kind of play with these values a little bit as you're going through things, okay? Also, something that's really hard to visualize right now is, where does my card begin and end, right? Because my card, well, according to my design, I want it to have a white background, so I don't want to change the background color of it. But I do probably need to get like this background image in there so I can see what my card actually looks like. Let's go ahead and do that piece by grabbing this guy. Oh no, I deleted the CSS. Let's grab. Cool. So I just grabbed that image. And what we're going to do is we're going to come into this early career. Okay. And we're going to set the background to a URL. And then we're going to paste that URL in there. So we save that. And then we come back to our design. And huzzah! I have a background image. A background image, I mean, it's cool. It's there. You can't really see it. Okay, so there's some things we could probably do to fix that. Another thing that we also probably need to do is my card is, it doesn't have a background color, right? So let's go ahead and fix that. So let's come into here. Let's say background color, white, and now I have background color. So now it's a little bit easier to kind of see. Okay, it's still kind of hard to see though. So something that might be kind of nice is we can use a drop shadow, a box shadow, and let's do something like 0, 2 pixels, 8 pixels. Let's go black. Okay. And what that does, it might be hard to tell, but I put a little shadow under the box. Okay, so it kind of almost really lifts it up, right? Which is kind of neat. Okay, I also might take this card and I might round out the border just a little bit. So let's go border radius. And let's do something like, I don't know, 15 pixels. And that gives me a pretty rounded edge. Might be a little too much. Might use something like 5. And then I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm kind of liking that. That looks pretty good. But I don't like the width of the text compared to the height of the image. That looks not as good, right? So maybe we want to do something more along the lines of 33%. And now we're getting somewhere, right? Okay. My overall card might also just be a little bit small. Maybe I want to do something like, let's go 48%. And I'm kind of liking that. Now, something else that I might want to do here is I want to create a little bit of space between this picture here and this text, like a little bit more spacing here. With Flexbox, we can take this and we can add a little bit of gap. And we could do something like 10 pixels. And what that's going to do is that's going to push things apart still within the width of that thing. We could also play around a bit more with padding. So I could do something like padding and do something like 10 pixels. And that's going to take the inside, right? Those packing peanut concept, and it's going to move the text away from touching this edge. It's going to move this image away from touching the corners here. So all that's looking pretty good. Like I'm liking this. I still don't like that my background image, I can't see like Goku over there doing his ki blast. That's not okay. You got to see Goku, man. So something you can do here with this background is we can adjust how the background works. So we could say something like background position. Nope, I'm sorry, background size. And we could do contain. And what that's going to do is that's going to make sure that the image has to stay within the space that it's allowed. So whatever the height and width is, it's like it's going to fit. Oh, and by the way, if there's extra space, I'll just duplicate the image around. Because why not? Why would that not be the default? It's like, that's gross. I definitely don't like that. If we use something like cover, cover is going to basically try to scale the image up to fit the area as best as possible. You're going to lose stuff on the edges, but it's going to kind of stay focused on the center of the image. So as I adjust my screen size, we should pretty much always see Goku over there. It's pretty cool. So again, a lot of different properties. Why do they all exist? Because different edge cases for different things. If I take this card and I duplicate my card, so I just basically created 3 copies of the exact same card, I've got that card in there 3 times. And they're all stacking vertically. So how do I get them to stack horizontally instead of vertically? Yeah, we want to flex. And what do we want to flex? Okay. If we look at our CSS, the cards themselves are flexed. I flex the card content to get things to lay out side by side. So if I want my cards to be able to do the same thing, I probably want to flex the early career, which is the container that's holding the cards. Does that make sense? So let's come in here and let's change this to display flex. And now my cards all fit. But you look at this and you're like, what is going on? Right? My background color, like I can't see it anymore. And weren't those cards supposed to be taking up 48% of the width of the screen? Well, flex by default is just going to shrink things down so they fit. And you're like, that's not cool. I don't want that, right? Why is it background image automatically duplicates and flex doesn't automatically wrap? I don't know, man. I didn't come up with this crap. I just have to code within it. So one of the other rules that we're going to apply to this early career is we're going to say flex wrap wrap. And what that's going to do is it's going to say, okay, cool. I will stack everything then instead, unless I have enough room to make it work. And now you're looking at this and you're like, but wait a second. Those cards should only be taking up 48% of the width. So bare minimum, I should always be able to get at least 2 side by side, right? Not quite. And the reason why is because of this padding right here. This padding is coming into count with this overall width here. So it's like, man, I got 48%, but I'm losing 10 pixels here and 10 pixels here. So I'm losing 28 pixels worth of that 100% value, which happens to be more than that 48%, time 48 plus 48. So I'm using too much space. So now you play this game and you're like, wait a second. So does that mean I need to like adjust this down to 46? Hey, it works. But that's kind of lame, right? That's lame if you have to deal with that type of stuff. And reality is sometimes you'll need to, right? And other times there's other ways around this. Okay. Something we can do is that we can add in some gap here. So again, gap is going to space everything apart. So let's do something like 10 pixels. Gap is going to stay relative and it's going to take into account the overall width that it has because it's part of the flex system. What's kind of weird is that there's different rules that apply to different areas of your layouts here. Margin and padding don't take into account like are basically part of the calculation for the overall width of the page, but gap is not. Gap, it like figures it out and then it lets the stuff know. It's because Flexbox is newer, margin padding is older, and so the more like advancements that come out with the language, they usually try to kind of fix some of the things as they release new features, but they don't break the old features because that would be a breaking change. And you could imagine if you had a website that you haven't updated since the 90s and now all of a sudden it just like breaks. It's like, that's not cool. You broke my legacy stuff. So the browser has to be very considerate about how it rolls out new features, which means us as developers who are dealing with this crap every day have tons of stuff to learn. You got to learn all the old stuff and you got to learn all the new stuff, which is actually kind of fun. Another thing we can do with Flexbox here is let me show you this actually, because this is kind of cool. If I open up my dev tools, I'll have to zoom this out just a little bit. And let's grab this container. With the Flexbox tools, if you open up your developer tools and you click on this little icon next to where it says display flex, I can click on this and it gives me all these little options. These are like all of the options that I can choose to configure about Flexbox for that particular container. And if you're like, man, I don't know what any of these icons do, just click them. Just see what they do. And so you're like, cool, I don't like that this card is over here. I'd like this card to potentially be centered underneath these two cards. Does that make sense? Let's find an icon that maybe kind of looks like that. And so as you kind of look at these, you're like, okay, what does this one do? It does exactly what I wanted it to do. It's going to take all the content and it's going to justify it to the center of the page. I clicked on this one. That's going to justify everything to the start. That's going to justify everything to the end. This is going to just like try to space things out as far as it possibly can. So you'll notice we have more space here. So that's going to take into the account the 10 pixel gap that's needed. And then it's going to keep things really far apart from each other as well. What's nice about that is you can always just come in here and you can play around with these types of things and be like, how do I want this to look? Maybe I want it to look like this. Also, I have no idea why my cards are so tall. What did I do? I know why. This is silly. I use display flex on the card itself. And this image is trying to take up 33% of the width and 33% of the height. And because I put this on here, it's basically saying, okay, for as wide as this card is, this image needs to be 33% of the height of it, which means that this text box, this whole text box area has to grow to accommodate the size of that image. We could take that height stipulation off. So I just commented that out with control /, which basically says, leave that there because I just want to see what it looks like without it. So rather than having to erase it, I could just like temporarily turn it off and then I could turn it back on. And in all honesty, that looks quite a bit better for kind of what we're going for, right? We also could put in some like max widths and a bunch of other things like that. There's a lot of other things that we could do to dive into this further. The one extra one that I did want to put in there was our justify content center. And that's going to give me my cards kind of like I want them. Now, that being said, we're not 100% perfect with our mock yet. Just takes more time, takes a little bit more attention, takes, a little bit more building. But if I was building this for like the very first time, cool, I have the basic layout. I'm going to move on to the next section and hammer down the big things about that next section and so on and so forth. And then I come back and I fine tune like, oh, those cards are way too tall. Let's actually put the right text content in there, not just garbage text, so we can actually see what the layout's going to look like. And let's adjust it for all those things. Now, that being said, it's noon, so we're going to be wrapping up here for today. But that is a pretty good first start.